After two twin flames meet, something within them changes permanently. It is not a subtle or temporary shift. It is a deep transformation in the psychic structure that makes it almost impossible to experience the same level of connection, intimacy, or recognition with anyone else. You can try. You can become involved with objectively wonderful people who treat you well, who care for you, who offer stability and companionship, but something always feels absent. There is always that quiet feeling that no matter how sincere the affection may be, it does not reach the same deeper layers that were once awakened. It is as though you discovered a dimension of intimacy that simply does not exist in ordinary relationships. And now you must live with the awareness that it exists while remaining beyond your reach. In this video, you will understand exactly why it becomes so difficult and sometimes impossible to feel true fulfillment with other people after experiencing a twin flame connection. I am going to explain what happens in your psyche during these encounters that makes them impossible to reverse. Why your inability to accept less is not weakness, but evidence of something far deeper. And most importantly, what this reveals about the nature of these connections that completely go beyond our conventional understanding of love. And if you stay until the end, you may understand why forcing happiness, where there is no true resonance, may not be the answer, but instead honoring what was awakened in you, even when that leads you down paths other people cannot understand. Because perhaps this inability to accept superficial connections is not a problem to fix, but a compass guiding you toward a truth you have not fully faced yet. But first, you need to understand what truly happens in your psyche when two twin flames meet, and why this encounter permanently changes your ability to connect with others. When you connect with your twin flame, you are not simply falling in love with someone who attracts you physically or emotionally. You are experiencing something that moves through much deeper layers of consciousness, something that activates parts of your soul that remain asleep in ordinary relationships. It is as if that person carries a unique key that opens doors inside you that no one else can even locate. What makes this encounter so transformative is that it awakens what exists most deeply in your nature. That person does not simply accept you as you are. They recognize who you are at a level that goes beyond personality, life story, or surface traits. It is a recognition of essence, of soul, of something that existed before you were born and may continue long after this life ends. And when you experience this level of recognition, when someone sees you so fully and so deeply, your psyche expands to hold this new dimension of intimacy. This is where the perspective of depth psychology, as developed by Carl Jung, becomes essential. Jung spoke of the self, the center and totality of the psyche, the unified essence of both the conscious and unconscious mind. The twin flame encounter is not simple infatuation, but a phenomenon that activates this self, forcing the psyche to expand. It is as if this encounter becomes an archetypal catalyst that prevents you from returning to a superficial state of consciousness. The challenge is that this expansion is permanent. It is as though your soul has been stretched into new territories of connection, and now it cannot return to its previous form. You cannot undo this knowledge. You cannot pretend you do not know what it feels like to be truly seen, deeply understood, and completely recognized. And when you try to connect with other people after this experience, you begin to see with painful clarity that they simply cannot reach those same areas of your soul. It is not their fault. It does not mean they are bad or inadequate people. It only means they do not carry that particular key. They do not operate on the same frequency that resonates with your deepest essence. You can like them. You can admire them. You can even love them in a certain way. But there is always a part of you that remains untouched. A dimension of your soul stays silent because there is no one on the other side capable of speaking that language. And that is where the real pain of finding and losing a twin flame begins to live. It is not only the pain of missing that one person, it is the painful awareness that you now know a form of connection that most human relationships simply cannot offer. It is like seeing colors that others do not even know exist, and then having to live in a world that only sees in black and white. You try, sincerely, to convince yourself that you can be happy with someone who offers stability, companionship, and practical compatibility. You try to appreciate the qualities this new person brings into your life. You try to focus on what they can offer instead of what feels missing. But there is always that moment, usually when you are closest, when they are being vulnerable or affectionate, when you should feel loved and connected, and instead you feel a deep emptiness, because you know with certainty that no matter how genuine their love may be, it does not reach those deeper layers that were awakened by your twin flame. This awareness does not come from the rational mind. It comes from a much deeper place, from a wisdom of the soul that cannot be persuaded by logic or controlled by willpower. You can make a list of all the reasons why you should be happy with this new person. You can clearly see that they may be better for you in many practical and emotional ways. But there is still a part of you that cannot surrender fully, cannot feel that complete resonance you once knew. And what makes it even more painful is realizing that this person deserves someone who can love them without hesitation, without a part of their soul still turned toward another connection. You can see the unfairness of being physically present while emotionally leaving a door open for someone who may never return. But at the same time, you cannot close that door. You cannot simply decide to stop resonating on the frequency that was awakened by your twin flame encounter. This is not stubbornness or emotional immaturity. It is a deep psychic reality connected to how these bonds function on levels that go beyond conscious choice. When two souls recognize one another at that fundamental level, when there is such deep resonance, it leaves permanent marks in the psychic structure. It is as if that person left a fingerprint on your soul, and now you can feel when every other connection does not fit that imprint. The people around you often do not understand. They see you turning away from potentially meaningful relationships. They see you unable to fully open yourself to people who genuinely love and value you. And they assume that you are trapped in the past, that you are idealizing something that was never that extraordinary, or that you are using that past connection as an excuse to avoid commitment. But you know that is not the truth. You know you are not choosing unhappiness. You are not refusing to move forward. You have simply discovered that there is a form of connection so deep, so life-changing, that everything else can feel superficial in comparison. There is a specific kind of loneliness that only those who have lived through this can truly understand. It is the loneliness of being beside someone who loves you, yet cannot reach the parts of you that were awakened by another person. It is the loneliness of smiling and sharing conversations while a significant part of your soul remains silent because no one there speaks that particular language. It is the loneliness of being physically touched while missing a kind of touch that exists in dimensions ordinary physical contact can never reach. You begin to question whether it is worth connecting with other people when you know you may never be able to surrender completely. Whether it is fair to them, whether it is fair to you, whether perhaps it would be more honest to remain alone until you can either reconnect with that specific bond or somehow heal the part of you that was permanently changed by that encounter. But physical loneliness also has its own pain. The absence of companionship becomes heavy, and you find yourself trapped between the dissatisfaction of being with someone who does not fully resonate with you and the pain of being alone while carrying a longing that seems to have no clear answer. And the hardest part is realizing that as time passes, the mark only grows deeper. It does not fade with time as people promised it would. It does not disappear with distance or with new relationships. In fact, the more you try to force yourself to be happy with other people, the more obvious the difference becomes, and the more visible the absence of that specific resonance you once experienced becomes. You begin to wonder whether this is a curse or a blessing. whether knowing that level of connection was worth it, now that you seem unable to accept anything less. Whether it might have been easier to never experience that intensity at all, to remain unaware that such depths of intimacy were even possible. But deep inside, you know that even if you could go back and avoid that encounter, you would not. Because as painful as the consequences may be, there was something sacred in that experience. Something that revealed possibilities of human connection too rare and too meaningful to dismiss as illusion or mistake. But this is what you need to understand about why this happens, about the deeper nature of these connections, and what they reveal about how souls relate on levels modern culture is only beginning to understand. What truly separates a twin flame connection from ordinary relationships is not only emotional intensity or extraordinary physical attraction. It is that these encounters activate what could be called essence, resonance, a phenomenon that occurs when two souls share a compatible fundamental frequency at levels that go beyond personality, life story, or surface compatibility. In the analytical psychology of Carl Jung, this can be understood as the expression of a primordial archetype, the archetype of wholeness or union. It is not simply love between personalities, between egos. It is recognition between essences, between the deeper self. It is when two people share compatibility not only in personality or values, but in their deepest essence. It is as though their souls vibrate on such a similar frequency that when they meet, they create a resonance that awakens aspects of both that usually remain dormant. That is why you feel more like yourself with that person than you ever have with anyone else. We all carry a unique energetic signature, a particular frequency that shapes who we are at our deepest level. This frequency is formed not only by our experiences in this life, but by something that reaches beyond this individual existence, something many people call the soul, the essential being, the deepest self. Most relationships exist in more surface layers of life, involving personality, compatibility, shared values, physical attraction, and common interests. These things matter, and they can create fulfilling and lasting relationships for many people. But a twin flame connection functions on an entirely different level. It is when two people share compatibility not only of personality or values, but of fundamental essence. It is as though their souls are vibrating on such a similar frequency that when they meet, they create a resonance that amplifies aspects of each other that would otherwise remain asleep. That is why you feel more fully yourself with that person than with anyone else. Not because they complete you in a romantic sense, but because in their presence, parts of your essence that usually remain hidden can finally express themselves completely. This resonance creates a kind of intimacy that goes far beyond what is possible in relationships built only on personality compatibility. You do not need to explain who you are. You do not need to translate your deepest feelings into language the other person can understand. There is immediate recognition, an understanding that happens before words, before even conscious thought. It is as if both of you speak the same native language of the soul, while with other people, you are always speaking a foreign language, no matter how fluent you become. And when you experience that level of resonance, when you know what it means to be truly seen and understood in your essence, something irreversible happens in your psyche. You develop what could be called expanded connection consciousness, a heightened awareness of the difference between superficial intimacy and essential intimacy. And once that awareness exists, once you know the deep difference between those two forms of connection, you can no longer pretend you do not know. That is why later relationships, no matter how objectively good they may be, never seem enough. Not because you are unfairly comparing people, but because you now carry an internal reference point for what human connection can be. You know what it feels like when someone not only understands your words, but resonates with the deeper frequency of your emotions. You know the difference between someone who accepts you intellectually and someone who recognizes your essence before words are even spoken. And what becomes most frustrating is that You cannot explain this to the people around you. You cannot make them understand why you cannot simply choose to be happy with someone who loves you and treats you well. How do you explain that the issue is not the quality of the person, but the absence of a specific resonance you now know is real because you have already experienced it? How do you explain the difference between being loved and being recognized, between being accepted and being deeply seen? You try to focus on the positive qualities of the new people who enter your life. You try to value emotional stability, consistency, availability, and all the practical things your twin flame may not have offered. But there is always that moment, usually when you should feel closest, when the new person is being especially loving or vulnerable, and suddenly a deep sadness rises inside you because you realize that no matter how genuine their love may be, it does not reach that specific place within you that was awakened before. That place does not ask to be touched. You are not consciously comparing. You are not intentionally judging. It happens automatically. It is an involuntary awareness that there is dissonance where there was once resonance. A sense that you are speaking on frequencies that are close, but not the same. Like two instruments that are almost in tune, but not completely. And that small difference, however subtle it may seem, is enough to keep you from surrendering fully. There is also something that happens to your own sense of identity in these later relationships. You begin to notice that certain parts of you, parts of your personality and your soul that once flowed naturally in your twin flame's presence, now remain quiet or dormant. Not because the new person judges you or suppresses you, but because there is not enough resonance for those parts of you to feel safe enough to emerge. It is as if you are a complex musical instrument with many strings, and your twin flame was one of the few people capable of playing all of them at once, creating the full symphony of your existence. Other people may play some of those strings. They may create beautiful and meaningful melodies, but certain notes are always missing. Those particular frequencies only respond when there is compatibility at the level of essence. And slowly, you begin living as an edited version of yourself, not because you are being deliberately inauthentic, but because important parts of who you are simply do not find an echo in the person beside you. You can still be a good partner. You can still love. You can still be loved. But there is always an underlying awareness that you are living with only a fraction of your full capacity for intimacy and authenticity. And that creates a very specific kind of emotional exhaustion. It is exhausting to remain in relationships where you constantly have to translate your inner world into language another person can process. It is draining to feel as though you must explain or justify parts of yourself that were once instantly understood. It is like learning how to fly and then trying to convince yourself that walking should feel just as satisfying. People may tell you that you are being unrealistic, that no one can provide that level of connection all the time, that you are romanticizing the past and ignoring its flaws. And perhaps in some ways they are right. Perhaps you are idealizing certain moments, remembering the highest points and forgetting the challenges. But there is one truth they cannot dismiss. You experience something real. Something that permanently changed your understanding of what is possible in human connection. And that experience does not disappear simply because others believe it should. It does not vanish just because life would be easier if you could forget and move on. It remains as a permanent mark in your psyche, an internal reference that continues to exist whether you want it to or not. And you also begin to realize that your inability to feel fully happy with other people is not only about the absence of that one specific person, it is also about having developed a capacity for connection that now has nowhere to go. It is as though you developed emotional and spiritual abilities that can only be fully expressed in very rare kinds of relationships, and now those capacities remain unused. There is something deeply frustrating about knowing you are capable of levels of intimacy, vulnerability, and authenticity that simply do not find a match in the relationships available to you. It is like being a world-class athlete forced to compete in casual games, or a gifted musician asked to play only simple notes. You can do it. You may even do it well. But there is always the painful awareness that you are living far below your true capacity. And the people around you may misread that as arrogance, as though you believe you are too special for ordinary love. But it is not about superiority. It is about having discovered a capacity within yourself that can no longer be fully expressed. It is about carrying a potential for connection that remains mostly dormant because life has not offered the right circumstances for its full expression. And eventually you begin to wonder whether the problem is not your inability to move forward, but the rarity of finding someone who lives on that same essence frequency. Perhaps there are other people in the world with whom you could experience that same level of resonance. But perhaps the chance of finding them is so rare that an entire lifetime could pass without it happening again. And that possibility feels both hopeful and terrifying. Hopeful, because it means you may not be permanently trapped in the loss of one specific person, that perhaps there are other souls whose frequency could meet yours. Terrifying, because it also means you may spend years, perhaps the rest of your life, carrying the memory of something extraordinary that may never happen again. But here is what you need to understand about the deeper meaning of this experience and why it happened to you specifically, because it may reveal something important about the path your soul is following in this life. The inability to feel truly happy with other people after meeting your twin flame is not a flaw or a weakness. It can actually be a sign that something much deeper is taking place in your personal evolution. When you experience that level of connection and then find that you cannot accept less, your soul may be communicating something essential about your nature and about what you came here to learn in this life. There is a possibility that very few people consider. Maybe you are not meant to force happiness inside relationships that do not fully resonate with you. Maybe this inability to accept superficial connections is not a problem that needs to be fixed, but a compass pointing toward a different path. A path where you honor the depth that was awakened within you, even if that means long periods of solitude or relationships that others may see as incomplete. Our culture places enormous value on being in a relationship, often to the point of suggesting that something is wrong with people who remain single or who cannot fully commit to the partners available to them. But what if, for some people, especially those who have experienced deep soul connections, the right path is not to force themselves into places where there is no true resonance, but instead to build such a profound relationship with themselves that they become capable of living fully even without an external connection that mirrors their essence? This does not mean giving up on love or choosing isolation. It means developing discernment about what kinds of connections you allow into your life and how much emotional energy you choose to invest in them. It means being honest about the possibility that maybe you cannot offer another person the kind of total and unconditional love they deserve. Not because you are broken, but because a meaningful part of your capacity for intimacy was awakened to operate on a specific frequency that is not often present in ordinary relationships. Many people who have lived through twin flame encounters spend years trying to force themselves into conventional relationships. They feel guilty because they cannot surrender completely. They criticize themselves for making comparisons they never intended to make. They judge themselves because they cannot simply choose to be happy with people who are objectively kind and loving. But perhaps all of that guilt and self-judgment is unnecessary. Maybe it is completely valid to recognize that you were changed by an experience that permanently expanded your capacity for connection, and that now you move through life with different inner standards than most people. That may mean long periods of solitude while you wait for another connection that resonates at that same depth. Or it may never happen again. It may mean entering relationships that you consciously understand as partial, where you give what you can honestly give without pretending it is more than it truly is. It may mean developing forms of intimacy with yourself, with your creativity, or with the spiritual dimensions of life that can partly soften the absence of a human connection that fully reflects your essence. There is also a more difficult possibility. The true purpose of that twin flame connection may not have been to create a lasting relationship at all. It may have been to reveal the capacities for love and intimacy that already existed inside you, capacities that you now need to learn to direct not toward one specific person, but toward life itself. It may be that the encounter acted as a catalyst, awakening you to possibilities of connection that you must now learn to express in ways that go beyond traditional romantic relationships. This may sound less romantic than the idea that twin flames are destined to remain together forever, but perhaps it is closer to the truth. Maybe these extraordinary connections do not happen to create perfect couples. Maybe they happen to awaken individuals to dimensions of themselves that would otherwise remain dormant. And once awakened, those individuals must learn how to integrate these new capacities for intimacy and connection into their lives in ways that may not fit conventional relationship models. What you experienced was not less real simply because it did not become a lasting relationship. What you discovered about yourself through that connection does not become less meaningful simply because you cannot recreate it with other people. The expansion that took place in your psyche is permanent, and it matters, even if it comes with the painful cost of making you less willing to settle for conventional forms of connection. Maybe the real question is not how to be happy with other people after finding your twin flame. Maybe the real question is how to honor what was awakened inside you through that experience. How to live authentically with the expanded awareness you now carry, even when that means making relational choices other people may never understand. How to build such a deep relationship with yourself that the absence of a perfect external mirror no longer prevents you from living fully. If you recognized your own experience in this video, if it felt as though these words were speaking directly to your journey, then it may help to continue exploring this path with more clarity and less suffering. Drawing from the deeper teachings of Carl Jung on soul connections, many people begin to understand these experiences in a more grounded way when they stop seeing them only as loss and start seeing them as transformation. The goal is not only to understand what was awakened within you, it is to develop a more mature relationship with that awakening, and most importantly, to find ways to live fully even when the connection that awakened everything is no longer present in the way you once hoped. And before this ends, take a moment to reflect on one simple truth. Nothing happens by chance. Because the inability to accept less after experiencing an extraordinary connection is not weakness. It is evidence that something real and deeply transformative happened within you. And honoring that truth, even when it feels painful or inconvenient, may be far more important than forcing yourself into connections your soul already knows are not genuine. Thank you for having the courage to recognize your own experience. I will see you in the next video.